Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. My name is Chris the High Guy Jacobs, and today we're starting a three-part series into what is going to be the New Year deep dives into all of the heroes. We have, what is it, 3, 4, 8, 11 infantry heroes to talk about with one honorable mention. And lots of kind of context to kind of go through. But in order to break this down for people to understand a little bit better, we're going to look at this a little bit differently. Instead of ranking the infantry heroes or ranking the heroes based on who I think is better and blah, 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 like you've seen other tier lists before, we're going to do this more based on just telling you what the hero does and then giving you ideas on where those heroes would be useful, so that you have a better idea of how to customize the heroes and experience and what you want to do. Because remember, it's not just about who's the best, because there's so much nuance to that question. You have to remember, a game like this is specifically designed to give you things to work for. Unless you're out here wailing out and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to have everything as soon as it drops, and to have maxed out everything as soon as it drops, that's just not going to happen. So you have to make yourself a couple of key decisions, because trying to spread yourself thin and be good at everything is, number one, very expensive, and number two, very inefficient. Like I said, the only way to be good at everything is to buy everything and have everything, which costs a ridiculous amount of money. So for most players, especially most players who watch my content, we're looking at what's best for free-to-play players or for low-spending players and things like that. So what we're going to look at is not which hero is the best. We're going to look at what the heroes do and where you would use them. And to help break this down a little bit easier, typically there's three things you're going to choose to focus on. And this always comes down to my original conversation that says, look, you have to decide what kind of game you want to play, right? What kind of game do you want to play with your account? Do you want to be up in everyone's face fighting in the field? Do you want to be the person that everyone relies on to garrison towers and other targets? Do you want to be the rally lead that everyone's looking to deal the damage to the enemy? Where is that? Where do you fall within that parameter? Does it mean that you can't do a little bit of everything? No. But again, unless you plan on spending a ton of money, chances are you're not going to be able to be good at everything. The game is just not designed that way. It wants you to spend money, so it splits things up in a way that makes you, the player, decide how you want to do it. For most of us who grind through the levels, who spend time doing dailies, all this kind of stuff, who don't spend the hundreds of thousands of dollars needed to unlock everything, we do what's called hyper-focusing our troops. So you're going to choose one avenue, whether it's infantry, ranged, riders. You're going to put all of your tech into that troop-specific type until it's complete. Then you're going to move on. So following that analogy, you have to ask yourself what you want to do best. So like I mentioned, there's really three mentalities. You can be a field fighter, you can be a rally expert, or you can be a garrison expert. And that's really the kind of avenues to split it down. So what I've done is I've broken down the infantry heroes to start into a three-part series where we're going to look at the heroes that are involved, what they do, and what they'll be good for. The first part of this series we're going to look at is the field fighting heroes. We're going to look at the field fighters. And from the 11 infantry heroes that are out there are 4 that are really good, kind of, at least in my opinion, specifically focused on field fighting. Now, what do I mean by field fighting? I mean taking your troops out in the field, meeting other troops in the field, fighting other troops in the field. You're going to be doing this to have field control. You might do this to swarm the enemy rallies. You might do this to get into a murder ball and, murder over your opponents. Anytime you're out fighting in the field or on the battlefield is going to be kind of your focus there. Now, that also does mean that some of these field rally or field heroes can be used for garrison or rally. Don't get it twisted. They have lots of utility. You can move it around. But ideally, you're going to put these main 4 that I'm going to talk about in the field fighting position, not in rally and not in garrison. Okay? Again, understand, it doesn't mean that you can't. It just means that you probably won't. Just because there are better opportunities. Okay? So, let's look at the 4 field heroes, the 4 field fighting heroes that I think you should look at in the infantry side of things. Now, before we dive deep, let's touch on a couple things. Infantry is medium speed in the field, does the lowest amount of damage in the field, and is the tankiest in the field. So they have got the highest defense and HP. Okay? Which means that they are going to sustain in the field a lot longer, but not necessarily do as much damage. So one thing you want to focus on with infantry is getting your troops to be as influential as possible. One way of doing that is buffing and debuffing, which is something we're going to talk about with some of these heroes and their skills. Okay? But what you'll notice about a lot of these field fighting heroes is that they are specific to helping out in the field, providing buffs to other troops in the field, or being able to damage multiple troops in the field. Okay? The first hero we're going to talk about is my boy Miyamoto Doichi. Miyamoto Doichi, the Scorched Earth Wanderer. He's probably one of my favorite leaders in the infantry side of things for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's got a nice AoE. He does a decent amount of damage. He's quick in the field. And he's one of the hardest hitting infantry heroes that you have. Okay? Now, when we look at these heroes, one thing I am going to say is that we will look at them at their awakened setting, okay? At their max level. And the reason why we do this is because you should be looking at upgrading your heroes one at a time until you get them awakened and max leveled. Okay? Don't be like me. Don't have several heroes that are decent leveled and not awakened, because you're really not taking advantage of their awakening skills and awakening abilities. Okay? Awaken them one at a time. I just awakened Riven here last. I'm going to be working on Bodalla next, and Stella's going to be coming in after that. Okay? So you work on them one at a time. So, back to Miyamoto. Let's look at what he does, and then we'll look at where you can actually use him. Like I said, you're going to use him in the field, typically leading in the field. And I'll give you a couple of people that you can actually lead him with to give you more sustainability, or more, kind of give you more options in the field, okay? So first things first, Miyamoto Doichi. His rage skills, called Two Heavens at Once, costs 1,000 rage, deals damage to up to 3 enemy squads in a fan-shaped area at a damage factor of 13,000. Damage taken by each enemy squad reduces by 20% for each additional target enemy squad. So he can hit up to 3 enemies. Well, what does this mean? How does this actually calculate? Well, this means if it's just him against one target, he'll be doing 13,000 damage to that one target. If he has 2 targets, instead of 13,000 damage to one target, he'll be doing 10,000 damage, 10,400 damage to each target. If he has 3, he'll be doing 7,800 damage to each target of 3. So it still ends up being 21,000 damage total among 3 squads, which is why he's good in the field for distributing a lot of that damage and getting it onto a lot of different marches. Okay? Next, we got this defensive posture, which is a passive skill. When leading only infantry squads, damage increases by 12%, with counterattacks have a 20% chance to reduce enemy HP by 27% for 3 seconds. Now, this is going to be specific to while he's leading in the field, when you typically are going to be running only infantry marches. But this also means he does have the capability of working inside those rally capabilities as well. You can put him as a rally lead, and he's going to do okay, because not only are you going to be leading only infantry squads, so you're getting that flat damage increase, which is great, but now you're going to still have those counterattacks, and if you're doing multi-rallies, things like that, you got multi-counterattacks coming in, which gives you the ability to proc to have that HP damage reduction, or that HP reduction. And as we all know, HP is one of the most important stats in this game. Okay? The higher your HP, the less chance you have of going to the hospital. Therefore, the less troops you have to have to retrain and heal and the rest. Influence is very important. So having a hero like Miyamoto being able to reduce that HP by 27%, yes, it's only a 20% chance. But think about it this way, okay? Counterattacks happen every second, which means that this is going to trigger once every approximately, on average, 5 seconds. Okay? This will trigger on average every 5 seconds and last for 3 seconds. So it's a decent amount of time, right? As long as you're still in battle, to have it trigger to have that HP reduction, which is something that you want to focus on. Next, we've got Swift Momentum. It's a skill enhancement, passive skill, basically just increasing your infantry squad attack by 40% and your travel speed by 25%. Okay? Now we've got Quick Draw Technique, which is another passive skill where he's going to increase infantry squad defense by a flat 20%, giving counterattacks an additional 20% chance to reduce skill damage dealt by the enemy by 28% for 3 seconds. Again, counterattacks trigger every second with a 20% chance. You can anticipate it triggering once every 5 seconds, lasting for 3 seconds, which actually works out to be pretty substantial damage reduction. And it's a flat damage reduction as well. Okay? A flat skill damage reduction, by 28%. Okay? And then lastly, basically what you're doing is your awakening is going to increase your swift momentum. So before awakening, your infantry squad attack is only going up by 30% and your travel speed is only going up by 15%. Once you have him awakened, he's much faster in the field and he hits a little bit harder. So you can see why this guy would be pretty decent in the field. Who are you going to pair him with? Well, there's lots of options in that situation. If you want to hit really hard, and low sustainability, high damage, you're going to pair him with a Dut. If you want to have a decent damage, decent sustainability, you could pair him with Thunder. You're going to lead, obviously you'll have him lead with Thunder as a co-lead, and you'll have him lead with a Dut as a co-lead. Granted, you could do it the other way around. You could have a Dut lead with him as co-lead because they both have the skills talent tree, which is kind of what you want in a leader. They want to have that skills talent tree so that you're triggering more skills, generating more rage, dealing more damage, or more heals. Pardon the hiccups. Okay. Now, there is a reason I'm not mentioning Bodalla here, because in the situation of Bodalla and Miyamoto, I would not lead with Miyamoto. I would lead with Bodalla, and I'll go into that when I talk about Bodalla here a little bit later. Okay, so that's Miyamoto. Pretty cut and dry, pretty straightforward. Next, let's look at Adut. Adut, the Black Pearl. Super great, super consistent, still a great hero. She is becoming a little bit dated when you look at her damage factor and things like that. She is a little bit older, but she still definitely has play. She can be used on rallies and things like that. There's just better options, as you'll see when we cover the rally video. But still a pretty solid hero all around. Okay, now let's go through her skills, and you'll see why she's still used and why she has a lot of flexibility. So first things first, her rage skill, Firepower Assault, is going to trigger at 1,000 rage, dealing 12,000 damage to one target and increasing your squad's defense by 30% for 3 seconds. Okay, so this is what I mean by saying it's outdated. Her damage factor is 12,000. If you look at some of the newer heroes like Julia, for example, where we're looking at 12,005. If you look at someone like Stella, for example, you're looking at 13,005. If you look at someone like Bard, for example, you're looking at someone at 13,000. Once he's awakened, you're looking at 14,000. So you can just see that she's starting to get a little bit old. Just to see some of her numbers not nearly as impactful as others. But that doesn't mean she's bad. She's still good. She's still very good, has a lot of utility. Okay? So here, you're going to punch for 12,000 damage and then increase your defense by 30% for 3 seconds. you're going to, in her next ability, Queen of Arms, this is one where she takes a little bit of time to ramp up. So every 5 seconds of battle, increasing infantry squad's attack by 11%, up to 44%. So 20 seconds in battle, you're going to increase that attack by 44%. This is one of the only, I'd say, negatives to her kit working in the field, where you might actually want to use her in rally, because in order to get this ramped up, you basically need 20 seconds of continuous battle. And if you're in the field, 20 seconds of continuous battle takes a decent amount of time to get to. So it's one of those things where you can be in battle and then break off battle very quickly, and you're not getting her fully ramped up. So being able to use her in a more sustained situation, even in a counter rally, right? Using her as a counter rally leader against someone who's rallying your watchtowers, or you know what I mean? So you've got a watchtower there rallying you. You can use her as a counter rally, which is going to allow her to ramp up her attack all the way up. Next, we've got Steer Clear, which is her passive skill, increasing infantry squad travel speed by 30%. If the damage reduction buff is active, or debuff is active on your squad, there's a 50% chance to nullify the debuff and heal your squad at a factor of 4,400. So at this point, you're probably asking, well, what damage reduction buff are you talking about? Well, once you have her awakened, she gets a damage reduction debuff. So we'll talk about that in a second, okay? But basically, this is going to increase your travel speed by 30%, which is pretty substantial, especially in the field, right? Which also makes it okay, which also is kind of counter to this one here, where she has problems sticking with players. So as long as you put her with someone like Miyamoto, for example, who also provides, like we mentioned, a decent amount of movement speed, to allow her to stay in combat with targets, right? Because, of course, we want to ramp that up to 44% attack. Lastly, her Perseverance passive skill, increasing infantry squad attack by an additional 40% if the remaining squad size is greater than 50% while battling on the world map. Now, this is a little bit wordy, okay? So let's go through this so that we understand how it works. What this means is, when you're battling on the world map. So if you're in a rally, for example, you're battling on the world map. If you're in a field battle, you're battling on the world map. If you're in a garrison, you're not battling on the world map. At least I don't believe you are. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that's considered battling on the world map. I believe that's considered something entirely different, at least for this situation, okay? So when you have a remaining squad size greater than 50%, you're going to get an additional 40% attack. When you have a squad less than 50%, you're going to get it. It's going to switch to defense. So basically, the stronger you are, the more you're hitting. As soon as you roll over to under that, though, you're going to be much tankier in comparison. Okay, once you roll over that 50%, which is kind of good for rallying as well, which is why she does good in that situation. Right? Because you can send that rally and then you can continue to refill it to make sure that you're above 50%. And then when you drop below, it gives you time to revamp and refresh and refresh and refresh. Okay? So there's definitely some use to her being a rally hero. The only problem is there's a lot of better heroes when it comes to rallying that I think are better options than what she does. So she gets relegated to fighting in the field or typically running counter rallies, things like that. Okay? Now, the Tribal Pride is a new skill that she receives once she gets awakened, which upon receiving skill damage, so once she gets hit by a skill, reduces the skill damage received by you and nearby enemies or nearby allies for 20% for 2 seconds. So this is good, for example, in a scenario where you're fighting in the field and you're swarming and you're dealing with massive groups, or maybe you're counter rallying and you're being swarmed, where, and you get hit with this, and now all of a sudden you can reduce the skill damage received by you and nearby allies by 20%. So you get hit, and then the second rage skill doesn't do much, and you're buffing anybody else who's in your area. So if you're, for example, being swarmed or being rallied, and you choose to swarm, it's going to have the capability of triggering and affecting up to 5 squads. Or just simply fighting in the field, 5 strong in the field, or in a murder ball, what have you. Anytime you're receiving skill damage, you're going to be helping everybody else take less damage, which is a super awesome skill. Probably one of the better ones when it comes to awakening things. Okay? But that's a dud. Number 2, very, very strong. Not number 2, I just mean number 2 in this video. Very, very strong, lots of usability, but I see her fighting more in the field now than anywhere else. Again, I think it's just because she's getting a little outdated with the new heroes that they've been dropping and things like that. Next, let's talk about Bodalla. Actually, first, sorry, I gotta talk here real quick. Who would you pair a Dut with, and where would you use her? Well, like I said, you're going to use her in the field, and you want to put her with someone who's going to be speedy. You'd put her with Miyamoto, okay? That would be my number 1 damage pairing. Works really well, makes them fast, makes them hit harder, do a lot of decent damage with Miyamoto's AoE, allows them to hit in the field. Pretty strong. If you want to do multiple lines and you're running Miyamoto on a different line, you can run a Dut with someone like Tom, because Tom, by his own right, has a decent amount of sustainability and can be flexed a little bit into field play, right? Because he's got a little bit of heals, he's got a little bit of damage, he's got sustainability, damage reduction, and the rest, okay? So you can use him there if you want. But there's kind of lots of options with a Dut. You can pair her again with Bodalla, but typically, and again, I'll give you the example why. I would actually lead with Bodalla instead, so I wouldn't necessarily suggest that as a Dut pair. But you're looking at a Dut Miyamoto, a Dut Tom, even something like a Dut Raiguro would be okay to give her some extra sustainability in the field, and obviously give a little bit with Raiguro's slow in the field, because he's got the slowdown where I think it's right here. Sorry. When attacked, reducing travel speed, so it allows them to keep up with people a little bit. And, you know, especially with the Dut wanting to be in battle, that can kind of pair and synergize decently well as well. After a Dut, we're going to talk about Bodalla, my man, the Spirit Exorcist. Bodalla is arguably one of the most underrated, I think. I see him a lot, and he's got a lot of flexibility. He can be used in a lot of different places. Granted, on the field, I think he shines the best. But I've also seen him in Garrison, and I've also seen him running rallies. So there's lots of potential with my man Bodalla, depending on what you want. And since they recently buffed him, and they buffed his number 1 rage ability, it gives him more utility and a little bit more of a punch to him, okay? So let's go through Bodalla, and I'll explain why I believe he's a better field fighter than anywhere else. First and foremost, gaining Enlightenment is a rage skill requiring 1000 rage, where he gains a shield for 3 seconds with a shield factor of 10,800. When his shield vanishes, deals the remaining 50% shield value as true damage. And this is something I want us to notice. True damage to up to 2 enemies. Deals at least 15% max shield damage or shield value as damage. Which, first off, is going to mean that he deals 1,600 at the least, okay? He's going to deal 1,620 damage, true damage, to 2 targets. Now, what does that mean? Well, in every game that I can think of, true damage basically means avoiding all defenses and avoiding all other modifiers. So it's 1,600 damage flat with no modifiers coming off, okay? Which is pretty good, taking into consideration that he's also spending his time blocking damage, okay? And if you're doing at the bare minimum 1,620 to 2 targets as a flat true damage, that's pretty good, okay? This is what it means here. This damage will not be infected by the enemy's defense again. So it's basically being straight through with no defenses, okay? Now, this is why he has the capability of being used in the field as well as in other situations. Because if you think about it, if you put him on the field marching 5 troops, okay, he's not always going to be the target of that damage, which means that his shield factor isn't going to be dropping, which gives him the capability of having a higher amount. And if he's not being the target of those, right, you have the capability, there's ways to manipulate him in battle so that you can trigger at a full value, where you're dealing, say, 5,000 damage, true damage to 2 targets, which is pretty huge, okay? All while simply being a nice shield factor at 10,800. Next, we've got 6 faculties purification. It's a passive skill. When not garrisoned, increases infantry squad defense by 32%, HP by 11%, and squad travel speed by 20%. I gotta check something. Okay, so he does 25%. So yeah, it's still a Dut and Miyamoto is the fastest infantry line. But to increase by 20% is pretty huge, which gives him a lot of reason to be out in the field. Now, granted, you don't get any of these abilities when he's garrisoned, but that doesn't mean he doesn't do a decent job garrisoning as well. He's got, especially with his shield, and with, you know, you pair him with someone like Riven, for example, which we'll go over in our garrisoning video. They synergize very well. So there is capability of using him there too. Okay? But let's keep in mind, as soon as you put him in garrison, you're not getting any of these capabilities. But you're getting these capabilities if he's running a rally, right? So that, by its own right, actually makes sense and works. Next, you've got Karma Cutting. Counter attacks remove 9 rage from the enemy and have a 20% chance to deal additional damage to the enemy at a factor of 1960. Now, yes, this is a 20% chance, okay? Counter attacks remove 9 rage and then have a 20% chance. So anticipate once every 5 seconds dealing an additional 1,690 damage flat. Not flat, but 1,690 damage, okay? Base that with the damage that you're dealing here off this, it's a nice little boost to an additional damage source. Ephemeral Body and Mind as a passive skill. Increasing the infantry squad attack by 34%, and while his shield is active, reduction in damage taken by 6.5%. That's damage reduction, not individual skill damage or basic attack damage. That's overall reduction in damage at 6.5%, which is pretty huge. Okay? So, again, you can see why you would have use in the field, and so far also use in rally. And once you have him awakened, gaining enlightenment, his #1 rage skill, changes. So instead of 10,800, he gets 12,500. We're still getting that remaining 50% chance, but now it triggers up to 3 nearby enemies. Okay? So what this means is he goes from dealing a flat 1,620 damage to 2 targets, true, to a minimum of 1,875 true damage to 3 targets, which is a huge update to what he does. So this makes him tankier, hit harder, have a decent utility in his kit to be used in a lot of different areas, and because of his recent change making this at least 15%, means that you're always getting damage off with Bodalla. So it's a decent pick. However, when thinking about who to pair him with, because he has so much utility, we're going to focus on pairing him in the field. Okay? When pairing Bodalla in the field, who are you going to pair him with? Depends on what you want to do. If you want damage and speed, so you want to fight in the field, do a little bit of damage, have some sustainability, and just have fun, I would pair him leading Miyamoto or leading a Dut. So Bodalla lead with Miyamoto and a Dut co-lead. And you're going to ask me, but Chris, the high guy, why would I want to do that? When Miyamoto and a Dut just, they hit harder, right? Why wouldn't I want to lead with them? It's because when you look at their talent trees and you come over and look at this right here, skillful firepower, okay? Increases skill damage by 7.5% for 6 seconds after using a skill. Now, his damage that he does is not skill damage, okay? It's true damage, which means if he is a co-lead to these guys who also have that talent skill, right? It means that their skill, like Miyamoto's skill would trigger, giving this bonus damage to nobody. So instead, because they both have the same trees, so you're getting the same skill regeneration, lead with Bodalla, because here's what happens. Bodalla will trigger his rage skill first, which means that 7.5% skill damage will trigger on Miyamoto's skill or a Dut's skill, meaning that they end up doing 7.5% damage, more damage. Only if you lead with Bodalla first. So that's why I would lead with Bodalla first and have Miyamoto second, or have a Dut second, or if you want to run 3 squads in the field, so you want to have a little bit of a different one, you can go ahead and pair them with Raiguro and have synergy with their shields. Okay, so there's still some play with Bodalla in the field. He's still honestly probably one of my favorite heroes, and I love his character design. Super, super good looking. I love the kind of the machine parts on him. You know, the kind of what is that clockwork type? You know, the clockwork type staff that he's got going on, and his little blue bird. Probably one of my favorite designs for heroes. So well done on Bodalla. Now, lastly, because that's the 3 that we've talked about, right? We've talked about Miyamoto, Adut, and Bodalla. Lastly, inside the Field Fighting Heroes, let's talk about my boy, Marco, and his girl, Eri. Now, I have to bring these 2 up, but I bring them up last because there's a lot of context and nuance that goes on when we talk about Marco and Eri. Because Marco and Eri are... what are they called? Collaboration heroes, okay? Which means that they only came out specifically during an event where you could only acquire them during this event. You had to, you know, spend, or you could get them for free, but you had to work on them. But the only time you really level them up was during this event. And it's very much the same as the other hero, Mai, who is a collaboration heroes from the King of Fighters, which we'll talk about when we go through the riders. But they're very much the same. The problem is they're great heroes. However, and this is a big however, if you want to level up these heroes outside of the event that they are released in, watch this. It costs twice as many fragments to upgrade them. Okay? Twice as many. So now you have to ask yourself, Marco and Eri, are they good? Absolutely. They're great. They're fantastic. We're going to read through the skills, and you'll see why. They've got tons of utility, great in the field, someone you would be blessed to have, especially if you have them awakened, but extremely expensive. So are they worth twice as much? No. They're good. They're just not 2 times as good as other heroes. Okay? So that's why you got to kind of keep this all with a grain of salt, and that's why I bring up Marco and Eri last. So, let's talk about Marco and Eri. Let's talk about these collaboration heroes, and let's give a kind of a look at what this all means and why these guys actually work inside the field as well. Okay? So first and foremost, all these collaboration heroes have a bonus skill. Okay? This one here, Marco and Eri has one called Soaring Birds, whereas Mai has one called I'm not even going to pronounce that, okay? The point is they have a little bonus where here they get to increase damage dealt to rider squads by 5%, but damage taken from ranged squads increases by 3%. So they do more damage to riders, but take more damage from ranged. It's a give and take, obviously, okay? And again, Mai's got the same thing. She deals damage to ranged squads, but takes more increased damage from infantry, okay? Super simple. Same decision, same comparison when you're talking about collaboration heroes. So they naturally have this one, which makes them a little bit better, right? Gives them more utility in the field, right? Because they're already dealing damage to rider squads additionally. But let's read through his skills and you'll understand a little bit more why he's so useful in this game. First and foremost, you've got explosive shots. At again, a rage skill requiring 1,000. We're dealing 13,000 damage to an enemy target and reducing rage of up to 5 nearby enemies by 80. This effect can be triggered on the same target only once in 5 seconds. Okay? Which basically means you're getting a reduction on 5 targets. So if you're fighting in the field in a murder ball, for example, you're reducing their trigger rates. An 80 rage reduction isn't anything to scoff at. I mean, it's not huge. It's not 1,000. It's not 100, 150. But think about it. If you're doing that for 5 targets in a field, you could be looking at removing 400 rage, which is half of one rage skill. Okay? Next, you've got electronic interference. Counterattacks have a 30% chance to reduce HP by up to 47%. Okay? Of up to 5 nearby targets. Counterattacks, let's read this again so we all understand. 30% chance to reduce HP of up to 5 nearby enemies by 47%. That is huge. Now, granted, it's a 30% chance. So think about it this way. Typically, because again, counterattacks happen every second. Once every 3 seconds, you're going to be reducing that by 47%. And it's going to last about 3 seconds. So while you are continuously in battle, on average, this should be triggering once every 5 seconds. On average. Inside battle. And a reduction of 47% of the enemy HP is huge. Remember, HP is the most important stat that we'll talk about. And a reduction of 47% is huge. So, you can see why in a murder ball, 5 strong in the field, even as a rally, as a rally leader, that's huge. Okay? Next, we've got steel armor. Every 10 seconds grants a shield to oneself for 2 seconds at a shield factor of 3,300. Also reduces travel speed and damage of up to 5 nearby enemies by 35% and 16% respectively. Okay? So every 10 seconds, you get a shield for 2 seconds. You get a reduction on squad travel speed and damage of up to 5 nearby enemies for 3 seconds. So granted, it's only, active typically, 30% of the time, but a 16% damage reduction is huge, and a 35% speed damage or travel speed reduction is huge. So those are big stats to be dealing with, okay? Flat damage reduction and travel speed reduction. Those are big, big modifiers, okay? So this will allow him to keep up in the field, allow him to deal more damage in a field, allow him to debuff 5 targets in a field, which is huge. And then lastly, you've got slug power. During field battles, squad attack increases by 27%, and travel speed increases by 22%. So still not as fast as Miyamoto and Dut. You're still going to have them 2 faster there. But this wouldn't be a problem to run Bodalla and Marco and Eri as your second fast line for infantry and have them both swing for the fences. So you could do that too. And it would work pretty darn well. Okay, let's go back to looking at him here. Now lastly, once you have him awakened, he gets a new skill. It's called Rescue Reward. When taking skill damage, there's a 50% chance to restore HP to up to 3 nearby allies at 1,600. This effect can only be triggered once every 5 seconds. So pretty much every time you're taking a skill damage, there's 50% chance to restore HP for you and 3 other people. So for you and 2 others. Now granted, it's only 1,600. But every skill, it's a coin toss. Right? So not only are you getting a reduction in rage, which means that you're getting less skills on their end, right? You're reducing the amount of damage they have. You have a huge reduction in HP when you're counterattacking. You've got a huge flat damage reduction here with a travel speed reduction. And you've got a huge attack increase when you're simply fighting. So you can start to see how in the field, he would do very well. Even in rallies, he would do very well. Okay? But this is the biggest misnomer because, again, he's not twice as good. It costs 690 fragments to awaken one hero, which means to awaken Marco and Eri, it's going to cost 1,380 fragments. Instead, you're probably better off awakening someone like Victor and Bianca instead of having just Marco awakened. Which is why I haven't touched Marco at all, and I don't even use him very often. Like, I don't use him at all. He's just in here as part of the collection. Okay? But in reality, if you had spent on him, or if you have him, and you want to use him, and money doesn't matter, or fragments don't matter, he is a great hero. It's just he's not 2 times as great as any other hero. Okay? But that's going to cover part 1 of all of our field fighting heroes. We've talked about Miyamoto, we've talked about Adut, we've talked about Bodalla, and we've talked about Marco and Eri, which is a great first step into all the infantry heroes that we have to deal with and what they're going to be focusing on. Next video, we're going to talk about rally heroes, and I'm going to bring up our honorable mention. So there's a hero that you should kind of be aware of, because as much as you might not think he's valuable, he definitely still has value, especially as a free-to-play or smaller player. Okay? So stay tuned for that. In order to actually understand and know when those videos drop, you have to do one thing. You've got to like the channel, you've got to subscribe, and you have to click the little bell and fill out the notification bell so that you get any new notifications when we drop new content. We drop new content every week. We've got a Pompeii replay every Tuesday. We've got a podcast interview every Wednesday. We've got game content that drops throughout the week. And you always want to make sure that you're always going to be knowing when new content drops. Feel free to throw in in the comment section what your favorite infantry pairing is. And if you disagree with any of my thought process, feel free to throw that in the comments as well. This is a conversation. Let's get it going. Other than that, folks, I really do appreciate you tuning in. Thanks very much. Stay tuned for parts 2 and 3 in the infantry side of things. And with that, love, peace, chicken grease, and until next time, stay lifted.